We now come to the LM curve, which is based on the premise that we have equilibrium in the money market. Equilibrium in the money market means that the demand for real money is equal to the supply of real money. On the previous slide, we talked about the IS curve, which is reproduced over here. The IS curve shows the relationship between real interest rates and income. But the IS curve does not tell us what the appropriate level of interest rate should be. The IS curve also does not consider the price level. And these are items that we will cover as we talk about the LM curve. But before drawing the LM curve, let's just go over some concepts. The first important concept is related to the quantity theory of money, which says that the nominal money supply, M, times velocity, this is a measure of the circulation of money, is equal to price level times expenditure. Remember, Y is both expenditure as well as income. Here we will take the expenditure interpretation. So price level times expenditure is equal to nominal money supply times how much that money is used. So this expression can then be rewritten like this. The real money supply is 1 over V times expenditure. If V is more or less constant, then this can also be written as K. Now, if we bring in this relationship, the supply of real money is equal to the demand for real money, then we can say that this supply is also equal to M over P D. This D stands for demand. So we are making demand and supply equal, which is a condition for the LM curve. Another point is that demand for money is inversely related to interest rates. And to keep our model simple, we are only considering the demand and supply of money. And bonds, stocks then are the other investments. So if we don't have money, then we will have stocks and bonds. So that will help you understand this statement over here. When interest rates are high, then you would rather own stocks and bonds where you are getting a better return. So the demand for money will be low. On the other hand, if returns or interest rates are low, then the demand for money will be high. So there is an inverse relationship or a negative relationship between the demand for money and interest rates. So note that we've established two important relationships here. The demand for real money has a positive relationship with income or Y, and demand for real money has a negative relationship with interest rates. So that's summarized over here. Now, if we hold real money constant, then we must have a positive relationship between interest rates and income. And that is depicted here by the LM curve. And I'll give you a simple example to understand why we say this. We have said that there's a positive relationship between demand for money, let's say that's denoted by D, and income. So D is equal to some constant times income. And there is an inverse relationship between demand for money and interest rates. So we'll have interest rates here in the denominator. If D is held constant, then notice that R can come over here. So we can say dr is equal to a constant times Y. Given that D is held constant and this by definition is a constant, then we have a positive relationship between real interest rate and income. And that is our LM curve. Since there is a positive relationship, the LM curve has a positive slope. Now what happens if the price level decreases? A decrease in price level means that real money increases. Remember, the definition of real money is M over P. We are saying that M, the nominal money supply, for example, is the same, but if P comes down, then real money goes up. If real money goes up, then the LM curve will shift to the right. The reason for this right shift is quite obvious. When the price level goes down, then at any level of interest rate, our real income is higher. Things are cheaper, so in a sense, our real income, our real buying power is higher. So that's why we say that the LM curve shifts to the right. Now we are going to look at how this model can be used to come up with the aggregate demand curve. On the left, we have the IS curve, and we have the original LM curve, which exists at a given price level. So let's say this is the LM curve when the price level is 100. Let's say that at this stage, the interest rate is equal to 5%. Now, there is a decrease in the price level. So let's say the price level comes down to 90, and as we just saw, the LM curve will then shift to the right. Originally, we had this equilibrium point where the interest rate was 5% and we had a certain level of income. Let's say that this income level, just to pick a number, is 200. Now when the price level comes down and the LM curve shifts to the right, then we have a higher level of income. Let's say this level of income is 210. So take this over to the aggregate demand curve, which we will plot over here. Our original point had an income of 200. So let's say income of 200 and the price level was 100. So let's say that we have income of 200 and price level of 100. Then when the price level came down, so it came down from 100 to 90, what happened to income? Income went up to 210. So we come to this point over here, which is 210. So notice that the aggregate demand curve is downward sloping, and we have used the ISLM model to demonstrate this downward sloping aggregate demand curve. On this slide, we will talk about movements along the aggregate demand curve. We've already discussed the IS model and the LM curve. Actually, it's called the ISLM model, and we have derived the aggregate demand curve. Notice that when we move along the aggregate demand curve, two conditions must hold. First, that aggregate income must equal planned expenditure, and this was related to the IS curve. The relationship that we talked about is shown right here. And the other condition that must hold as we move along the aggregate demand curve is that real money supply is willingly held by households and firms. In other words, we must have equilibrium in the money market. The way we expressed this on the earlier slide was by saying that the demand for real money is equal to the supply for real money. Let's look at a few more relationships. If we make a simplistic assumption that there are no changes in the fiscal balance and there are no changes in the trade balance, in other words, these two expressions are unchanged, then any changes in savings must be equal to any changes in investments. So this is another relationship that you can keep in mind, which will hold true as we move along the aggregate demand curve. Now, if price levels increase, so let's say that we are at a given point, so at a price level of 100, say the price level goes up to 110, increase in price level. What will happen to the real money supply? Obviously, the real money supply will go down. In the short run, we have a certain amount of nominal money supply. If price level increases, then the real money supply, which is M divided by the price level, this will go down when P increases. That's fairly straightforward. But given the fact that we need to have equilibrium in the money market, a decrease in money supply means that the real money demanded also needs to go down. And for real money demand to go down, the interest rates must rise. Why is that? Because when interest rates rise, then the demand for other investments such as stocks, bonds, etc. goes up, which means that the demand for money is down. So for real money demand to decrease, which is coming from here, the interest rates must rise. When interest rates rise, then that reduces investments and reduces savings. Another point is that this decrease in real money demand also needs to be accompanied by a decrease in income. So the way you can think about it is that there is a direct relationship between income and real money demanded. When income is lower, then real money demanded is also lower. So since we have lower money demanded as we move from 100 to 110, the income is also coming down. So on the income axis, we are moving left. If you find this material a little difficult, then that is justified, because in my opinion, this section, which is section 3.1, is one of the hardest in the entire curriculum. Now remember, this is just one or two learning objectives, and I have not covered all the details in this section, but what I have tried to do is address what is described in the learning objectives. And what we are going to do over the next few slides is look at the sorts of questions that you might encounter on the exam, or more specifically, we will cover the testable concepts. Also, if you have time, then do example 6, where we are given the equations for real money demand and real money supply, and we combine this information with what we did in example 5 to derive the aggregate demand curve. Most of the work here is algebra based, but if you do this example, then you will get a better sense for IS, LM, and putting the two curves together to come up with aggregate demand. Now let's do a few practice questions, and I want you to do these first before looking at the solutions. The first one: which curve represents combinations of income and real interest rates at which planned expenditure is equal to income? Hopefully this is easy right now because we have just been through the material, but it is quite likely that you see something as straightforward as this on the exam. So we are asked about income and real interest rates, and we need to keep planned expenditure equal to income. So this is clearly the IS curve. The next question: what is the relationship between investments and real interest rates? And remember, we talked about this in the build-up to the IS curve. When interest rates are up, then investments are down, and vice versa. So there is a negative relationship, and we talked about why that negative relationship holds. What is the relationship between investments and aggregate output? Here we said that there is a positive relationship. So as investments go up, then aggregate output goes up. So that's a positive relationship. Which curve represents combinations of income and real interest rates such that the supply of real money is equal to the demand for real money? This clearly is the LM curve. The moment you see this equality, we are talking about the LM curve. Next, if there is an increase in government spending, what is the impact on each of these curves? Now, you need to think about this before looking at the solution. This is a good question because it makes us think about the IS curve, the LM curve, and the derivation of the aggregate demand curve. And now go back to the derivation of the IS curve. Remember, this is what we looked at. We have income or output on the x-axis. We had S minus I, and then we had this expression over here. We are told that government spending is going up, which means that this expression is increasing. So this curve will move to the right when government spending goes up. Now what does that do to the IS curve? Recall, the IS curve is plotting real interest rate versus real income. Originally we were at this point X, and this X, let's say, corresponds to a given interest rate and a given level of output. If interest rates stay the same but government spending goes up, then effectively what is happening is this curve, which was the deficit plus net exports, is shifting to the right. So at a given interest rate now, we will have a higher income. So we can see immediately that our IS curve will shift to the right because at a given interest rate, we are at a higher level of income. So clearly IS shifts to the right. LM is not impacted by government spending, so the LM will not shift. And if you think about the derivation of the aggregate demand curve, what we did was we took the IS and then we had an LM curve, and we said what happens when the price level goes down. So if the IS is shifting to the right, you can see from this derivation that the aggregate demand curve will also shift to the right. So that is the answer over here. When there is an increase in government spending, the IS shifts to the right, the aggregate demand shifts to the right. The LM curve, however, does not shift. Now try this question. If there is an increase in nominal money supply, what is the impact on the three curves? Here notice that we are talking about an increase in nominal money supply. If the nominal money supply goes up, then at any given price level, the real money supply is also up. If the real money supply is up, then the LM curve shifts to the right. Notice that if the LM curve shifts to the right, then at a given price level, our output or expenditure has increased. Since at a given price level, the expenditure has increased, we can say that the aggregate demand also shifts to the right. There is no impact on the IS curve. Now try these questions before looking at the solution. Here we are talking about price level, and if you recall, price level does not feature when we talk about the IS curve, so there is no shift over here. With the LM curve, when we have an increase in the price level, that means that real money is down, so the LM curve will shift to the left. But remember, these shifts were part of the derivation of the aggregate demand curve. So a change in price level would simply mean that we are moving along the aggregate demand curve. So in terms of a shift, the only curve that shifts over here is the LM curve, and it will shift to the left. If there is a movement along the aggregate demand curve with output increasing, what is the likely direction of interest rates? So output is increasing, which means that the price level is coming down. And if we look at our ISLM model, when the price level is coming down, that means that the LM curve is shifting to the right. Given a particular IS curve, notice that the interest rates are coming down. So when we are moving from A to B, the interest rates are coming down. I hope these questions have given you a sense for what you might see on the exam. Notice that even though the material in the curriculum is quite difficult, most of the questions can be answered with some basic concepts. So practice this material as much as possible. Do the questions at the end of the reading and questions from other sources as well. In the next subsection, we will talk about the aggregate supply curve.